Moving forward, we have programs that are being built, like the Leadership Group for Industry Transition. To help us understand how we can look back to go forward, I'd like to join us on stage Johanna, Lissinger, Peitz, Senior Advisor, Environment and Klimat and Näringsdepartementet. It's Robert Andrén, Head of Strategy and Policy, Industrikraft, former Director General of the Swedish Energy Agency. Good to have you. Ludvig Lindström, Senior Advisor, Swedish Energy Agency. Hitesh Kumbat, CSO, Linear Montage, CFO, Sweden Kalpataru Power Transmission Limited. And last but not least, Pavan Talani, Head of New Delhi Office, Business Sweden, India. So Ludvig, we started today's panel with some of the case studies and successes of the work that you've been doing in the India-Sweden Innovations Accelerator. Tell us the story 10 years ago and where are you moving towards?
10 years ago and where we are today. You heard a couple of examples of the outcome. What we tried to do back then was to establish the framework that could replace the local presence for actors like these small companies that you just listened to. So establish a framework and a platform that could substitute for their local presence. Doing that, of course, we need to develop our relations with all kind of stakeholders, both public and the large companies, and all kind of incubators and clusters and so on national level, on city level, or on the state level. Everything was in order to have this framework, of course, not for us, for use it as a landing platform for other actors, and here exemplified by SMEs from Sweden.
So, Ludvig, with that, I'm going to come to Hitesh, because, of course, the India-Sweden story that you've been telling, and, of course, we had examples of earlier, was very much Sweden going to India. Sweden looking at opportunities in India for uptake. When it comes to Kalpataru and Linear Montage, you're working on both sides. You've actually come to Sweden and shown them a story that they need to take part of. When it comes to transition, and we've been talking transition all day, a lot of the challenges are not geographically specific. They are felt by anyone going through the transition story. Hitesh, I'd like to ask you, of course, in Sweden, some of the companies working in the areas you are located in certain areas of the country, and that's because of the price of power, the availability of electricity. You are at the center of this story. Tell us, how does it play out?
Thank you, and good morning to all of you. I think when we talk about transition, there are a lot of things which comes to our mind, but I think one thing is very basic when we talk about transition is electricity, power. Because what is happening in most of these processes is that something which was being run on fossil fuel in the past is now being run with a much greener energy source, which could be potentially a green energy. And Sweden is rich in green energy. When we talk about an industrial transition, Sweden is a country which was foremost when it comes to green steel. There is a lot of discussion happening on other industrial processes which are green. Now, let's take green steel as an example. Two key components for this process or this innovation to work successfully. One is that Sweden is abundant in good, rich iron ore. That's basic. But second component is that Sweden has abundant green fossil, let's say, fossil-free power. And that is the reason for Sweden to be successful in such industrial processes. There are many such examples. Now, we as a company have been very successful, or lucky, I would say, in coming into this specific niche. Actually, everybody sitting here, for them, maybe most of you might be thinking that, what is this guy talking about? Electricity is given in Sweden for maybe about 100 years. But that's actually not the case. You know, for many of these heavy processes and most part of Sweden, there is a concern of connectivity of electricity. Not that you get affected on a daily basis, but the way Sweden is rising, the consumption of electricity is going to go 2 times in next 20 to 30 years. Maybe it is 40 years, I don't remember the exact number, but yeah, it's about 20 to 30 years. And that's too much for a country where the population is only growing by 1 to 2%. And and on the top, the infrastructure to carry the power is very old. It's important to note that Sweden has one of the oldest grids in the world. So the infrastructure is very old, about 70 to 100 year old. That needs replacement. So all these parameters working parallelly bring us as a company, Linear Montage and Kalpataru Power, in the space wherein we are working towards making these industries, help them go green. SSAB is one of the foremost company in this space, and they are our client. Same way, Billerud Kost, paper and pulp, they are driving initiative of green packaging, also a client. And all these companies require a critical, important electrical installation in their setup. Without that, they cannot operate, and that's where we come in. So I think it's an interesting story because we see Swedish companies coming to India, but now in this case we see an Indian company coming to Sweden and helping towards the green transition and working in these critical processes for these companies.
Hitesh, I'm going to ask you one question because we heard from the case studies that opened the panel the importance of the stakeholder mapping that was done by the Swedish Energy Agency and Business Sweden and CII. And they were bigger than the footprint. They were allowed to kind of shoot from their shoulders, if you like. Now, tell me what have been your critical factors with Kalpataru coming to Sweden and the work with Linear Montage? What have been 2 of the main levers that allowed that to move seamlessly? And as much as I enjoy the word lucky, let's take that out of the equation.
I think one of the most important thing, at least for us as a company, we have learned is a mutual respect of the cultures. I would say that we stand at a very different the 2 cultures are far distant from each other, and it is very important. So we ended up coming to Sweden by an acquisition. So it was easy for us to get a already scaled up company, which we scaled up in last 5 years. We have more than 2.5 times grown the revenue, and the team has grown by 3 times. But that could not have happened if we didn't had a readily available, strong, great Swedish team. But at the same time, it's very important to have a mutual respect for the culture. Second is to use the synergies very carefully. So we have been using synergies. It's not a push strategy. So we have not been, we have only helped our company in Sweden to gain where we could come in. So whether it is providing them manufactured steel products, which is not available in most parts of Europe, or whether it is providing them sharp engineering support or the backup that we have been able to provide them. Also available in Europe, but the capacities are constrained. So we have been only giving them support where it is required. And that now our customer realizes. So it has been a journey, but now the customer realizes that we bring a niche which is required for Sweden. There are very little number of companies who are present in Sweden today who can do the work which we do. Actually, I'm proud and privileged to say that we are amongst the top 3 in Sweden who can do this work, and the investments coming our way is roughly around $1.5 to $2 billion every year, and we are the ones who are addressing that market amongst the top 3. So that could not have happened if the client would not have understood what we do and appreciate what we do. But you have to show respect to them. You have to only come and add value where it is required. And I think people are great here. Sweden produces some of the best engineers. This is the country of engineers, you know. So that always helps.
Thank you. So I'm going to take what you say, Hitesh, and Pavan, I want to ask you, because I think some of the numbers that you talked about, 40% demand growth, 2% population growth, a turnover 2 billion a year. These are big numbers. So initially the business case was what drove you, and of course has been how you've developed. Pavan, you've been working on the India-Sweden corridor for many years, and now we're talking transition, we're talking stakeholders, but standard operating procedure has not changed. What we're looking for, what will drive the business case has not changed. What do you see as the opportunities as we go forward?
And first of all, thank you so much for inviting me for this panel discussion. Let me start with giving some numbers from the Indian side, basically. So India is undergoing a very rapid energy transition. India is the third largest consumer of energy at this point of time. The Indian primary energy consumption is 19 times of what Sweden is consuming at this point of time. So today, India accounts for close to 7 to 8% of global primary energy consumption. And this is likely to go up to 14% by 2050. Now, with India setting up a target of becoming net zero by 2070, the energy sector, which accounts for 50% of India's global emissions, definitely has to undergo rapid transition. And this is what is driving the opportunities for Swedish companies in it. Driven by very strong government requirements now. Now India is going to launch a carbon credit trading system next year, and where the Bureau of Energy Efficiency has done a very detailed evaluation of thousands of units in India, trying to understand where they are in terms of emission levels, what they need to do further to bring it down to meet the required standards. So those kind of the background work has put in very strong requirement in terms of companies. And these private companies, they have been doing a lot of work by themselves, installing renewables, trying to improve the processes. But now they have reached to a point wherein they would like to get expertise and hands-on support from Swedish companies. Sweden has proven expertise in developing innovative solutions across different areas. Now, Indian companies, they want to go to next level, and that's where the opportunities are coming from. So if you look at energy transition as a whole, there are majorly 4 areas, starting with, of course, the deployment of non-fossil free green energy, which is close to 500 gigawatts of green energy is required in India by 2030. Second is the electrification, where we are talking about the grids. There has been a constant work ongoing on turning grids into smart grids. The AI deployment of AI systems, we're talking about self-healing grids. Then third topic, which we are very linked to the industry transition partnership work, is the net zero economy. There the standards are being set up, as I mentioned earlier, but also the Indian companies have announced their own plans to become net zero. We heard from Tata Motors earlier today, by 2045 they mentioned, or 2035, is what they are trying to become net zero. So they really need help. And that's where we have been doing workshops. That's where the frameworks like India Industry partnerships are really helpful. And then, of course, there is a definite demand of bio-based solutions, where Sweden is pretty strong in. So these are 4-5 areas which are definitely are of importance and where India needs hand-holding support. And that's where Sweden can play a very important role.
Thanks, Pavan. And I think what you say in terms of working together to find those strengths, you've talked about India's targets and the way in which this has been broken down firm to firm, which allows predictability. The carbon trading mechanism has come from something that's been built over the last 15 years. So it's not new. We're working with the same words over and over again, and we're growing and we're expanding. Johanna, I want to ask you, because when it comes to, and I think Pavan ended with a great way to pick up and segue to you, is that the companies need help. We're talking in this case about new technologies. We're talking about in ways to de-risk and invest in new technologies that will allow for the public sector, let's say, to set the direction that then can be picked up by industries. If we look back at Sweden, if we look at the last 30 years for where Sweden is today as a lead innovator in sustainable technologies, the public sector has played a critical role in unleashing the potential of the industry. What have been some of those roles that we can learn from and potentially replicate?
Thank you very much. And It's always a challenge to pick one or two things, because often it's a mix of initiatives that create that. I mean, I could probably pick one specific piece of legislation. I could talk about the carbon tax. I could talk about public procurement. I'm not going to do that. But maybe in a way come back to, let's say, 3 examples of, from the government side, trying to build trust, to showing we believe in this pathway that is the companies are taking, we believe in the ideas, and then from the policy side, what is it that we can do to help those? And those could be anything from support with finance to new innovations. It can be not necessarily partnerships, but dialogues creating better regulation. And it could also be, let's say, some kind of a help desk on how we move forward. So there are different examples. And maybe the most relevant for the discussions now are, of course, the industrial leap, which is away from the government side and from the policy, providing financial support to innovations. Ludvig is much better off than I am to speak about this, but this is an initiative from the government, being able to support innovations that benefit the environment, reduces greenhouse gases, negative emissions, innovative strategies, etc. So that's, let's say, one kind of program that one from government side can put in place. We have done it in one way in Sweden. Maybe it would be done in a different way in India, because I think that's also important when you talk about the policy tools, that there's not one way, and whatever you do has to be fitted to, let's say, the culture and traditions in the different country. I think it's also difficult in this context also not to mention fossil-free Sweden, which was put in place in 2015 at the same time as the Paris Agreement, and which during the last 10 years from now has been, let's say, that maybe engine in knocking on the doors of different sectors saying, this is possible, we can work with you to develop roadmaps for a fossil-free future. And I think they are now up to 22, 23 roadmaps. And the roadmaps, it's the products, but sometimes it's the process that leads to that product that is the most important. And that dialogue between those sectors that has been involved, with the governments, and both being, let's say, the driving force, but also saying to the policymakers, we can do this, but then we need A, B, and C. So that's one example. And maybe the last example that one could also give is last year there was an establishment of an acceleration offices to also help the transition. When we talk about these things, especially maybe for heavy industry, we often come to permitting as a kind of slowdowner in how to proceed. There can also be, let's say, conflict of interest between different authorities, supporting the different investments needed. So a year ago, Sweden established that acceleration offices to be that, let's say, trying to be the glue and trying to be the platform to help the communication between different actors, also accelerating the transformation. So 3 different examples and different roles, but in a way, to me, they are all trying, and we will come back to this, and many has mentioned the trust issue. They are trying to build, let's say, the trust between policymakers and business, and to also try to provide the long-term direction, which I think is also key in all of this. Thank you.
Yeah, I want to ask you a follow-up to that, because I think in what you said, there's such a rich toolkit here that we can learn from and utilize. Now, you sit in the governing body of the Leadership Group of Industry Transition, which is a public-private platform, which is doing exactly as you say, to believe, enable, and to create neutral spaces for conversation. What can LeadIT take from this example, and actually how should they look to move forward with some of the lessons that you very clearly outlined that have enabled change?
I think, in a way, looking at, and we will, in a way, come back to that maybe later, but looking at also the whole demand side as one key part, and also then I mean, with LeadIT, for example, I'm sorry I'm coming back to this, but I think it's interesting, and it's been interesting this morning also. When LeadIT started in 2019, it was the, I would say, smallest, most humble initiative at the stage in the Secretary General's Climate Summit at the time. We were a small country, like we didn't have any resources. It was I and one other persons working with this. India is a large country, but also had many other, as the Solar Alliance, things that they were working on at the time. But what I think actually kind of was the success already at that point was the trust issue. We had a long tradition of working together. We knew that starting small and trusting each other that we would be able to deliver would be key. And I think today, I think we can proudly say that we are one of the biggest initiatives still remaining from that time. And that is also, I think, I mean, thanks a lot to all of the work that the Energy Agency have done, to all of the partners here in this room, and also looking at, what is it that we can do together, and then not shy away from the challenges on the way. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Johanna. And I think you touched upon some key words that we've heard through the day, but now we're looking at operational examples of how these key words play out. Trust, but trust actually comes down to institutional sharing, dare to share, but also predictability in terms of the way forward. Robert, you have a vantage point now of industry, and we've talked about the public sector's role in setting out the messaging, pointing the direction forward to create the predictability that normally comes in with investing in change. From your perspective, from a public-private sector perspective, how important are these signals? How important have they been? How important will they be, especially in a time of geopolitical shifts, supply chain fragmentation? How do we go forward?
Thank you, and good morning, everyone. I've been missing the India-Sweden cooperation for a year now, so I'm glad to be back on stage. Thank you so much for that. Industrikraft is an industrial consortium, 17 of the largest Swedish industries, coming together by heart to actually make a change, to get a skin in the game when it comes to speed up the transition. To speed up the competitiveness of Swedish industry by fossil-free electrification, but at competitive prices, because at the end of the day, it's all about business. So you need to find a way forward to link the business case with the sustainability case. And I would say that from both perspectives, although I've been much longer in the public sector, that I think that it's crucial that the political level, the policy level, the public sector actually very quickly get the views on what is need to know, need to regulate, or nice to know, nice to regulate, right? That's a difference. At the moment, we have too much of it's nice to know, so we have application requirements and demands that are way beyond what you actually need in order to facilitate these spearheading companies, small or large. SSAB was up here. We talked about them. They're part of the Industrikraft. So is Volvo Group, ABB, Hitachi, Alfa Laval, Boliden. These are huge companies. And they want to do something. So policy level needs to facilitate and promote their spearheading. But it has to be made on a business perspective platform, right? And then, of course, as Johanna said, the public sector also needs to put some pressure on industry, right, with the regulations. But again, it should be relevant regulation. And I think that is very important. That's what I've learned so hard this last year, so to speak, by being in the industry perspective. But it's industry and industrial partnership can actually make a difference here and now. But sometimes they need some public help.
Robert, with that, with the here and now, and of course setting guardrails for the public sector when it comes to what the private sector can then take forward, I want to come to Hitesh and ask you some difficult questions, because we talk about the need for working together. Working together can sometimes be a little bit challenging. We look at joint investment, we look at technology co-development, we look at IP sharing, we need to accelerate deployment. And at the bottom of all of this, as you said, Robert, and we've touched upon, there needs to be a business case here. Now, you've come to Sweden and the profitability has doubled. How has that happened? You talked about mutual respect and knowing where to stand and how to support your business. But how do we actually take those learnings, replicate, scale, and try and find out ways in which we can take this forward?
Well, when we talk about the business case, I go back to the word you use, accelerate. Very good example which is coming to my mind, and something I was talking to Ludvig this morning. SSAB, one of the largest manufacturer in Sweden, a flagship company. They are setting up a plant up there in Luleå, and the plant got delayed by about 1 to 2 years. It's a public news, everybody knows. And the reason for that delay is they couldn't secure connection to electricity. So that's the business case here. How can we get faster connection? How can we make these plants come up faster, and energy transition or industrial transition become faster? That's where India and Sweden can play a very important role. India is, I mean, you hear about the Make in India, but you know, one of the key reasons for these delays in connection is that these the electricity companies, utilities, are not able to secure supplies of key components like transformers. It's a known global fact that all over the world there is a huge shortage of transformers. India is manufacturing a lot of transformers, and this could be an easy shift. We have tried testing this idea with a lot of our clients. We are not yet successful, but we will continue pushing that. But it's very much possible. And Hitachi Energy, you use the name, and we'll talk about it also later today. But companies can manufacture in India and bring it to Sweden, and that could be helping Sweden in moving forward with some of these blockages much faster. So there could be acceleration, there could be capacity building, like we as a company have been helping with capacity building and ability to execute such important projects. As I said, that most people ignore the fact that yes, maybe electricity is given, but it's not the case. So we need to use these initiatives like Make in India, and how can India help Sweden to come in this equation. It's not only how can Sweden come in, but I'm saying it's both way. And we can come and help each other in making these projects faster.
So I'm going to take that and I'm going to come to Pavan, because one of the key issues that we have had in the past, and Hitesh, you've overcome that, is going to commercialization of new ideas. In terms of we have pre-feasibility, we have pilots, we then take the next steps, and oftentimes that's where things get tricky. Now, with the 15 years that we've been working on ISEA in this case, and now, of course, the LeadIT program, if you can give me 2 key levers in terms of moving from pre-feasibility to commercialization.
Sure. I mean, when it comes to 2 key levers for this, one key lever definitely is to have an enabling framework. And I mean, what India brings in is the agility in terms of implementation. Sweden brings the innovation. Now, Indian companies are very keen and very fast when it comes to when they could realize that it's very easy to localize a technology from Sweden on a commercially viable manner. We have heard the example from Trifilon also. And definitely, so that's something, if we can create frameworks wherein we can provide already demonstrated or already set guidelines for technology transfer or localization, that is definitely can help Swedish companies and Indian companies come together and start scaling up much faster. That's one. Second thing is what the companies also need is, if you want Indian companies to continue committing billions of dollars of investments and also looking into also kind of using those investments also, they need some sort of confirmation in terms of policies, in terms of frameworks. I mean, when we talk about these kind of bilateral frameworks or multilateral frameworks, I mean, ITP is anchored at G2 level, which is fantastic. Now, how does this continue after COP30 is what the companies are looking for. I mean, we were part of the arranging matchmaking activities under the steel track as part of as a local partner to Energy Agency. We did a lot of work with DST, Ministry of Steel, Swerim, India, and there were a lot of companies who got interested. those 35 companies. A lot of meetings were all set up, but now we still keep on getting requests from the Indian side. Now what is happening? Can you help us more? Can you support us more? So another call or something on those lines with the continuous work between both countries can be really helpful. So, I mean, there is political will, there is an industrial competence which is there. What we need to create is frameworks which basically can help us in, as you mentioned, safeguarding the scale-up work and defining the implementation pathways. That's what India is looking for.
So Pavan, you give me a great segue to come to Ludvig now, and also Johanna, I would like to ask both of you. Pavan's talked about this India Sweden ITP under LeadIT, which is to kind of create the business cases to go forward, to create the real examples that operationalize intent, ambition to action. You also mentioned that maybe there's been a lot of talk about COP30. What happens next? What's the post-COP30 agenda? What will happen at COP30 and how will that lead us forward? Is it pilots? Is it commercial outcomes? Is it working together? What will be the phase post-2026? Ludvig, I'm going to ask you, and then Johanna, I'm going to ask you.
Okay. Yeah, we're talking about business case and where we are in ITP. I described the huge network that is built up, and the ITP is reflecting the same thing. We're part of several of the working groups together with Minister of Steel, DPIIT, Minister of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, and so on and so on. Talking about business case, what we're just now, we have established a framework with the different partners and co-chairs. We have been working with involving the industry from both sides, connecting them, bridging the contacts, all kind of workshops and problem defining activities. Right now we're in the middle of a call process. We closed the call 1st of September. Call for proposals for feasibility studies, aiming for pilot projects. Talking about business model and so on, this is what we can do. It's actually about risk sharing. And this is the first step. That is how we protect the government money. We do it stepwise, starting with feasibility studies and identifying relevant projects. The next step could then be pilot before moving over to a large-scale demonstration. All these steps is about both de-risking and risk sharing between government and the actors and the industry actors. And talking about, you said COP30, yes, that is our first important milestone that we've been working towards, and that is when we're going to announce the selected projects. That is not the end point, it's actually the starting point, because that is when we have been able to establish the Indo-Swedish industry cluster. We have a good handful of Indian and Swedish actors working together in the heavy industry, steel and cement. They have one thing in common, and that is decarbonization. And that is what we can then work with. While they work on their pilot project, we can work with the whole group and try to facilitate cross-learning and thereby also maximizing our investment, because it is actually investment. But doing that, we also help them to maximize the benefit for coming from their investment.
Johanna.
Thank you very much. I mean, my response would be very similar to what Ludvig said, for obvious reasons. We are working with the same project, so I'm glad. But I think also just emphasize that with the ITP and the Industry Transition Partnership, the COP30 has always been, let's say, our goal. When Kristersson and Modi met on the stage a few years ago, we say, well, we'll work towards COP30. I think, we can see now that that is not the stop. It's a milestone, but with the calls, the projects, this is the start. So we of course hope that this will develop beyond COP30 and also make real difference on the ground. And then, I mean, I think also one of the big, I think, benefits, success factor with LeadIT and ITP is, let's say, the equal partnership. So I don't want to respond for the ITP and LeadIT, because this is something we always, come together with our partners in India and say, what's our next step? But of course, I mean, if I as a person could dream, it's also, we have different sectors. We have started with steel and cement. There are other hard-to-abate sectors or high-emitting sectors. We heard, chemicals, plastics earlier today, for example. Do we dare to go into those? I'm not saying that we are, but if you ask me what I could see, for example, then I also just think that it's important to say, we have different, let's say, tracks in the industry transition partnership, with the institutional strengthening, with the policy making, with steel and cement, with innovation, with finance, and all of those really goes together. And I think also if you ask, from the Swedish government side, we're always trying to look, what we can do is to create that enabling environment from the policy side, provide the right investment climate, and we do that with the policy mix of looking at the right policy, the right financial incentives, the technology and the know-how. And those are the pillars also in ITP, and we need to work with all of them together to actually be able to deliver. Thank you.
Thanks, Johanna. I'm actually going to ask Robert to end this panel with closing remarks from industry, because you've heard now what the key engagement strategies are from a LeadIT perspective, from the government perspective. But all of this has to make business sense. We have to create the business case to go forward. So what are those key levers that we need to keep in mind as we develop these new roadmaps?
Yes, I think that one key is that we maintain high, clear, unambiguous sustainability and climate targets at all levels, global level, at the EU level, at the national levels. Those are important because they will help the spearheading companies to actually become competitive and make money. So, but I have to say also that in a very turbulent geopolitical world at the moment, where the political level is very volatile, industry can still act. We can still do a lot of things within the realms that we have at the moment. Do not forget that. We don't need to wait for COP that or COP this. We can act now. We can go forward. And I think that Industrikraft is showing that. We are willing to do something. We put our skin in the game. And we actually have the power, the finances, the know-how, the technology to do things here and now. If policy is not helping us, then we go anyway. So we need less think tanks and more do tanks. And I think that is very important to have in mind all the time. But the Swedish Energy Agency is a fantastic agency. The best, I would say.
Thank you so much. Let's give our panelists a warm round of applause.